This story is about a girl who, after 3 months of working at the 007 agency, manages to die from simple overwork. However, there is also good news in this dark story. She managed to be reborn. But it's not as good as she might have assumed. The bad news is that there's a man out there who uses people as tools. He's also cold-blooded, heartless, and bloodthirsty. Basically, to put it simply, he's a crazy guy. She manages to be reborn as a female supporting character in a bloody romance. Once she appeared in that world, she found a note with a purpose. She needed to play the role of the supporting character, Jang-mo Lee, successfully die a tragic death in order to complete the plot and promote the relationship between the protagonist and the heroine. And even though she's reborn in this novel, she also has an absolutely horrible mission to accomplish, which is hellishly unpleasant and complicated. This novel is called 7 Nights with the Wolf. As a cute little animal, it combined a lot of bloodshed imaginable. The novel is about the bloodletting between the heroine, the overbearing CEO, and the gentle hero, the main male character, Lee Han-ting. The second man is Gu Xiu-ji, and the main character is Su Min-shu. However, where there are main characters, there are always supporting characters, simply put, canon fodder. And it was hers. She was the eldest daughter of a small family. Jang-mo Lee was originally Gu Xiu-ji's fiancé. But later she breaks off the engagement and marries Lee Han-ting out of great love for him. Jang-mo Lee eventually learns that Lee Han-ting is only using her as a shield for the family, and she becomes enraged, leading to her tragic death. It's the supporting actress, the main catalyst for the hero and heroine falling in love, and coincidentally, the girl who worked for a reputable organization is now that supporting actress. And the next day, when the girl was standing on the balcony and thinking about what should she do next, a man suddenly came to her. He had flowers in his hands. He offered to go with him. This stranger was Lee Han-ting. At first glance, he seems like a smiling, harmless guy, but he is actually a confident, powerful, and gorgeous man. This man can't wait to get a wife to deal with his family problems. He also plans to trick poor Jang-mo Lee into putting herself in danger. The girl suddenly smiled. I know all this information and thought, do they really think she's stupid enough to fall for all these tricks? Of course, she wasn't stupid, so she changed the topic of conversation, asking Mr. Lee if he happened to be cold. The man replied that of course he was cold, and after that he came closer to the balcony. Then he smiled his enchanting smile and asked in a gentle voice, Is she really worried about him? Mo Lee could barely contain her emotions. Her heart was bursting out of her chest because of such beauty and tenderness. But she managed to master her feelings and just smiled and said that she was very cold too. She also added that she felt like she had the flu, so she makes a decision to go back and already turned around to go into the room. In parting, she also told the man not to walk under the balcony like a maniac, for it frightened her. The guy, who remained standing below with a bouquet of flowers, was astonished by the girl's reaction, because he had expected something completely different. And then he was suddenly very upset, thinking about the fact that she probably wasn't going along with him because she wanted to marry Gu Xiujie. He tossed the bouquet of flowers somewhere to the side and told himself that was a good enough idea. Mo Lee at this time had already gone inside the room and started to go downstairs to do her business, but when she was in the hall, she was very surprised. For there she was already met at the entrance by a blonde-haired guy. He took off his hat and greeted her, saying that he had made a reservation at the restaurant and asked if they could go now. Mo Lee was very surprised at the sight of him. She had almost forgotten about this guy. He was Gu Xiuji. In fact, he is the young master of the family and looks quite soft and gentle. But in fact, this young man has big problems with his head. His pity is worthy only of the heroine who saved his life in his youth. And his bride-to-be, Jang-mo Lee, in his opinion, is worthy of nothing but insults and humiliation. She is just a toy he is playing with, and this toy has an unpleasant ending, and her name is a cruel death. Mo Lee smiled at him and said that she was madly sorry. She thought to herself that it was unfair. After all, when others are reborn, They are surrounded by beautiful men and women while she has to start her journey in hell. At this moment, another person suddenly ran into the room. He was Li Hanting, and told the guy that she was definitely not going with him. Then the guy resolutely turned to the girl and asked that she come along with him. Gu Xiujie didn't pay attention to him and looked at Mo Li and asked who she would choose in the end. They both pulled the girl's arms around her and asked who she was going with. There was hope in their eyes. Mo Li just stood there silently for a while and watched them all do the same thing. She didn't really understand the difference, because no matter what choice she made, she would die anyway. She can't escape her death, of course, but she can beat the hell out of those two sick idiots. That's why from the very beginning, the girl tore up that sheet with the task. Mo Li pretended as if she was embarrassed and flirting with the men, asked, "What should she do now?" She shifted her gaze from one to the other and putting her finger to her lip, said she didn't want to choose anyone. Of course, this answer did not satisfy Li Hanting. He walked closer to her, grabbed the girl's hand, and menacingly asked her what "she doesn't want to choose anyone" meant. He looked her straight in the eye and asked, "Isn't she the one who has been following him around all this time and telling him to tail him and begging him to be the only one near her?" Mo Li wasn't surprised in the slightest, but rather it made her even angrier. She concluded that this guy was just playing with her like a dog all this time. She made a nonchalant look and, tapping him on the shoulder, asked, "Did he really take her words seriously?" She also called him dear. Mo Li, smiling, asked, "Didn't he still realize that it was all just a joke playing to the public?" Li Hanting was really surprised when he heard this. He didn't even have anything to say, as he didn't expect to hear such a response. At this time, his opponent stood to the side and began to silently rejoice, for this meant a small victory in the fight. Gu Xiujie didn't waste a second of his time. He walked over to her and moved closer to her, telling the girl not to worry, and also suggested that she go along with him. After all, they would have a very good time, he said. Mo Li rolled her eyes and asked what else it meant. She and his boyfriend really couldn't understand anything. Her two potential suitors stood looking at the girl in surprise, for they had not expected her to be so cold. And she, in turn, walked over to somewhere off to the side and sat down on a small couch. She smiled and said that there was no way she was going with him. Then she added that she didn't like either of them and asked if that wasn't clear enough. Gu Xiujie made a very serious face upon hearing these words and didn't understand how she could even say such a thing. After all, he had already made such plans for her. But then he realized that he should not give the appearance, and smiling asked who she had her eye on, because he was very interested. The girl didn't even have time to reply before Li Hanting suddenly came closer to her and put his hands on her shoulders, saying that he was also madly curious about who the chosen one was. He glared angrily at her and replied that as she already knew very well, he was certainly impossible to deceive, so she might as well not even try to speak untruths. Mo Li at this moment really started to get worried. She realized that if she didn't answer him, she would be finished right now. She smiled so as not to show them her fear, but in fact, her body was actually shivering. But at that moment, a little kitty with the number 3 5s suddenly appeared in front of her face. He greeted her cheerfully and said he was back and asked how her work was going. Mo Li could actually only see him, and things were really bad for her, so she didn't answer him anything. And when the cat was informed of what she had managed to do, he was downright furious and asked how such a thing was even possible. The creature started yelling at the girl, saying that he should have excused himself for the meeting. She had already done something wrong here. The idea is killer. The hero and heroine's powers are right off the charts, and he asked what she'd even done. The girl said nothing to this. The creature began to cry, saying that it was over, and if she died, he too would be put in solitary confinement for eternity. Mo Li smiled and tried to cheer him up, telling him not to worry, because there was still a way out. At this moment, she thought that behind Li Hanting and Gu Xiujie, the Li and Gu families were behind her, and she was from a small family. Therefore, if anything happened, it would be very easy for them to get rid of her. However, if you think about it and look at it this way, if she says she has a candidate who can crush them, they'll just back off. Mo Lee had a brilliant idea. She realized that the best candidate for the job was the villain from this very novel. This man's name is Fu Yanshen. He is the head of the Fu family, a determined, cold-blooded, and ruthless man. In fact, he became the head of the Fu family at a fairly young age, and it is even rumored that he was raised in a Buddhist temple due to his poor health. And when he became an adult, he forced his real father to become a rich and noble man. At the same time, he is the final boss of the novel and the mastermind behind all the events. The Fu family is so powerful that even the head of the Li and Gu families would not dare to offend this man. And almost every day the butlers, part-time assistants to Mr. Fu, come to him and tell him that there is another person who claims to be pregnant with his child. So there are actually a huge number of women who lie about having an affair with him. It's all about the fact that they just adore him and are looking for any way they can to get close to him. So he's been able to get used to these claims during this time. And now, the more the girl thought about it, the more right this idea seemed to her. Therefore, with a smile, she told them both that this person was Fu Yanshen. Li Hanting, when he heard this, was very surprised. He straightforwardly froze in place and asked, "Is it really Mr. Fu?" She nodded happily and said that was correct. Mr. Shen said that she was his favorite. In a situation like this, the most important thing for Mo Li is to lie by looking at her eyes, so it will sound more convincing. There was nothing for her to worry about anyway. After all, this Fu Yanshen would not know what she said, and chuckling in her head, the girl raised that she was indeed a genius. But at this moment, to the girl's surprise, the guy suddenly took out his cell phone and started dialing the very Fu Yanshen. She was very scared when she saw his number in her phone, because she realized that things could go wrong right now. Li Hanting smiled at this moment and said that apparently she was going out with him this evening, and he would dial him right now so she wouldn't have to do it, and said that she might not thank him for it. Mo Li didn't think that things could happen like this. She, of course, kept a nonchalant face, but there was chaos going on in her mind. The girl didn't understand when it could even come to this, and that was it. But at that moment, the kitty spoke to her and asked her what was wrong with following the original plot. He doesn't understand why it was necessary to insult both protagonists and to bring the villain into the story. He kept screaming and told the girl that she wouldn't even have 9 lives to make things right, what she had done. But Mo Li smiled and petted him, telling him not to worry, because she would work hard to fulfill the original task. But she thought to herself that it was strange enough. She didn't understand why she had to follow the story if she was going to die in the end. But she didn't ask her assistant about it, because he was already too angry with her. It was soon late evening, and Fu Yanshen was sitting in his office studying the various papers he had to sign soon. The man was quite focused and was very surprised when his phone suddenly rang, which took him off guard. The number was unfamiliar, so he picked up the phone to see who it was. When Mo Li heard that he had answered her call after all, she immediately said hello. In fact, she didn't even think that he would answer. In a very nonchalant voice, she called him dear and told him it was her, and asked if he wanted to go out with her tonight. The girl thought about the fact that the villain had a lot of mistresses, so he wouldn't even remember her call. She really hoped that he would play along with her and go on with his business. And the man himself did not understand who it was, and so he just sat there and kept silent. Mo Li was getting worried because he wasn't answering anything. She glanced at the 2 guys who were waiting for some kind of response from her. But at this moment, Li Hanting was tired of waiting for a long time, so he walked up to the girl and took the phone from her. He told her, smiling, that it seemed Mr. Fu didn't really want to meet her. Mo Li continued to keep a nonchalant face and said that it wasn't really like that. He was just shy to talk, that's all. To distract herself, she started to cut the apple, but she was so excited that she didn't even notice that she had taken the wrong side of the knife, so she cut her finger. The girl felt a sharp pain. immediately looked at the blood flowing from the wound and said she was in pain. At that moment, blood from her finger began to fall onto her bracelet that hung on her arm. Fiancé, who was still on the phone and didn't say anything, was about to hang up when he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his finger as well. He couldn't understand what was happening and why it was suddenly. Gu Xiuji, who as soon as he saw the girl cut herself, immediately brought a band-aid and treated her wound so that there would be no infection. He smiled caringly and asked how she had managed to cut herself in the first place, and added that he had wrapped her finger so it wouldn't bleed anymore. The girl only thanked him. Gu Xiuji looked her straight in the eyes at this moment and said that even if she hurt herself, the conversation with Mr. Fu was still not over. Mo Li was very surprised by these words. She looked at her cut and wondered if he thought she had cut on purpose to be pitied. The girl had no idea that they had such a bad opinion of her. In fact, she had had a fairly low pain threshold since she was a child, and she never intentionally hurt herself because it hurt too much for her. And what might seem like a weak pain to others, to her would be more like a piercing pain, like being stabbed in the stomach. She began to look at her bandaged finger and wondered if she had ever done it on purpose. But then she realized that something strange was happening, because it didn't hurt at all, and that surprised her. The girl suggested that it might be some special privilege for the villain to be wagering cannon fodder and get wounded. But Mo Li realized that this was how things had already happened and that she was about to be killed, so she decided that she could just take advantage of it. At that moment, a voice they had not heard until now suddenly sounded. It came from the phone. The man asked if she was in pain. She immediately took the phone and held it up to her coal and said, "Yes, there is a little bit." Fiancé, who was interested in this conversation, immediately asked her which hand was hurting. The girl, not suspecting anything strange, replied that she had hurt her right hand. At that moment, the man started to get up from the table and asked her to dictate her address. The girl was very surprised, and she did not understand what was even happening. Fiancé asked if she had changed her mind about going out with him, because he heard her frightened question. However, without waiting for an answer, he simply said that he was coming to get her right away. After that, he immediately hung up the phone. Mo Li and her little virtual assistant were terrified. They didn't understand what was going on and how such a thing was even possible. Kotick suddenly started screaming, asking what was going on and why the villain decided to come after the main villain. How was that even possible? Some time had passed since then, and before Man picked up Mo Li, she had some time to get ready. And now they were on their way in his big black car through the city. The girl was dressed quite nicely, and even attractively for the date. She sat in the back seat and thought about the situation. She hadn't really expected the villain to actually come after her. She thought at the time that it was just some stupid joke, that's all. However, no, they drive together in his car. Mo Li, since she was sitting next to him, had the opportunity to take a closer look at him, those beautiful facial features looming in the light of the night lights. And in that moment she realized to herself that to die with such a handsome man was the ultimate pleasure, and yet it was worth it. She looked contentedly out the window then, thinking of those two men who had been so eager for her to go along. I now think she was dating a villain, and that suited her just fine. Then suddenly, she heard the voice of a little kitten in her ear that came out of nowhere. He told her to enjoy it while she could. After all, this mysterious and bloodthirsty villain will surely bury her alive, so she can rest assured of her death. Mo Li heard this and said that he was basically right. So she decided to live a wonderful day and enjoy it to the fullest. Then the girl took her phone and started typing various ideas into the search box. How you can have a good time and have fun. Mo Li has been happily Li all this time, with various places to go and restaurants to eat at. And Fiancé, who glimpsed at her, noticed that the girl had been playing with her phone ever since she got into the car, and this surprised him a lot. After all, this had never happened before. He took a closer look at her arm, which was no longer covered with a band-aid, and saw a small red wound. The man then turned his gaze to his finger, which was perfectly healthy. However, he felt the nagging pain that one usually feels when one gets a cut. She decided to talk to her, and placing her hands in her lap, asked if she was in pain. Molly was very surprised when she heard this. She put her finger up and asked if that was what he was talking about. Then she added that she wasn't really in pain at all anymore. She smiled and said that perhaps it was certainly because she had a special physique. Fu Yanshun listened attentively, but tried to ignore the pain he felt in his finger. He assumed that he was probably the only one who felt it, because the girl said that she no longer had any pain. Then he decided to test the theory he had formed in his head. He took out a small knife, which he always kept in his right pocket, and cut the very finger that was hurting him. And when the man did so, Molly directly jumped up in her seat and shouted that she was in a lot of pain, showing her injured finger forward, while he carefully began to study her reaction. Then he shifted his gaze to his newly cut finger, and had no way of knowing what it had to do with anything. His mind was racing with thoughts of who could have sent her and what her goals were, as well as what other feelings besides pain they might share with each other. He suggested that their lives might be connected. Then he turned and looked into the girl's eyes and asked if she liked him. Molly hesitated for a while. She didn't know what to say to him, so she wouldn't ruin it. And when finally the perfect phrase was ready in her head, the girl smilingly looked at him and said that she had actually been admiring him for quite some time. But she also knows very well that she has a rather low status. But she told him not to worry, because her secret love is her business, and she doesn't want to bother him with it. Molly said that she would watch him from a distance and would also be his eternal follower. But the man suddenly replied calmly that there was no need for her to do so. She looked at him in surprise, and Fu Yanshun in turn grabbed her hand and pulled her closer, telling her that the closer she was to him, the better it would be. In fact, he was going to keep her as close to him as possible until he knew the whole truth and her goals. Soon their walk was over, and they pulled up to Fu's beautiful house. Without even turning to face the girl, Fu Yanshun said that he had some company business to attend to, and she in turn could rest in this house for now. After that, the car started up again and drove off, leaving poor Molly completely bewildered outside a beautiful and very expensive house. She turned to the system and said that her villain must have broken in some way, at which point she herself shifted her gaze to her finger and realized that it didn't hurt nearly as much at all. The kitten said in an indignant voice that not at all. It was not the villain who was breaking, but himself morally only. Soon the girl walked into the house to get some rest. She was immediately met by the butler and began to give her a little tour. The elderly man walked her down the hallway and told her that except for the office on the second floor, she could visit any room. If she needed anything, she could just call out to him. Molly smiled back at him. After that, she turned to the little kitten who had been following them all this time and asked him if he had even seen this beautiful house, and also asked him if he liked it. He was really annoyed by the way she called him. However, he said in an indignant voice that it was only the Fu family's villa anyway, and he didn't understand what could be the reason for such excitement. The girl heard this and was very surprised and asked if he really thought it was a villa, but not at all. It was a birdcage that was specially built by the villain to get her. Her eyes directly sparkled as she looked around and saw more and more luxurious things around her. When they walked a little further, Molly saw a room that was signed as a game room, and she finished her speech by saying that there was also a game room in the center of this entire cage. The system became indignant and said that she was really in some kind of trouble with her head. However, at that moment she opened the door to see what was in that mysterious room. And stopping at the entrance, she was very surprised when she looked inside and told the system that it was absolutely over. The kitten, because he was turned the other way, did not see it right away. However, when he turned around, he noticed a little boy sitting at the computer with headphones on. Molly, summarizing this whole picture, said that apparently there was also another bird present in Mr. Fu's cage. The girl stood and admired the incredible beauty of this strange boy. He really had a unique eye color and hair shade. But at this point, there was some sort of lapse in his game, and he suddenly started yelling, calling everyone there profanities, and saying that even a dog would be a better player than them. Molly was very surprised when she heard this. She even felt uncomfortable and told the system that this bird was very aggressive after all. She didn't understand how he could even cage an underage bird, and summed it up by saying that Mr. Fu was a real monster. But the system said that he is actually not some bird at all. His name is Fu Jiali, and he is Fu Yanshen's nephew. The girl, upon hearing this, was immediately interested and began to remember what she had heard about this guy. In fact, in the novel, Fu Yanshen is very cold and heartless. However, he was quite close to his brother and sister-in-law of the villain. He only became only because his brother and Fu's sister-in-law were accidentally killed by the Duchess's father. The best and only son of Fu's brother and sister-in-law was one of the few relatives the man cared for. The system said that as long as she pleases Fu Jilin, she can rest easy about the villain killing her. After all, it's the guy's favorite game, and she can win his favor with it. Mo Li walked closer to see what the guy was playing. He looked very upset, and then she saw that he had a red box on the screen that said, "Defeat." When she saw it, she exclaimed, saying he had lost. And she felt sorry for the guy. Immediately she took off her headphones and looked at the girl in surprise, and asked who she was and what she was doing in his room. She smiled and eased herself against his desk and asked him to guess who she was. The guy didn't even want to look her in the face. He said he's actually seen quite a few women like her who are in love with his uncle, and he doesn't care at all how she got to this place. He does, however, want her to leave. Mo Li ignored his request. She leaned closer to him and cheerfully said that she was Fu Yanshen's nephew and that she was very pleased to meet him. The guy looked at her indignantly and realized that he had given himself up after all. But then suddenly, he started getting notifications on his computer. Many complained that they had lost. However, others were asking what was even going on and who was there in the host's house. They were apparently really worried about him. Mo Li was still trying to get dressed one day with a contact guy and asked if he was a gamer. And when she looked at the good technique, she said it was pretty cool. But that phrase really pissed him off, and he asked how she could draw such conclusions even though she didn't even know about games or technology. The girl smiled. She realized that she had found the right contact and asked him what could be difficult about games of the MOBA genre and asked if he was a beginner. Then, all of a sudden, more comments sprinkled in. One of them laughed very loudly, saying that he couldn't believe that this woman was calling their host a rookie. Others asked if she even knew the game or not, since the host is the strongest king. One gamer said she has a pleasant enough voice and suggested she was very pretty, while another gamer said she was probably trying to get the presenter's attention on purpose and thought it was just awful. Fu Jiali was incredibly angry at this whole situation. However, he decided to test this stranger and said that if she was so good, let her go and play one round instead. At this moment, he stood up from the table, and Mo Li took his place. She put on his headphones so that she could hear everything that was going on in this game. Suddenly, the system started talking. He said he told her not to get involved with other people, and if she kept it up, she'd die, even sooner than in the original story. The kitten also said that Fu Jiali is a master of the game, and if he can't pass the game, how can she even do it? But the girl at this point had already started playing and said that she was really very good at it. The camera was placed on the circumcised headless body so that no face could be seen, and many wrote in the comments asking if this figure was real. Others asked for her to look into the camera because they really want to see her beautiful face. Well, there were some incredulous comments as well. One viewer asked, what's the point of having a nice body and arms if she doesn't show her face? He suggested that she must still be ugly. Others tried to cheer the girl up by saying that the woman doesn't know how to play cyber sports and told her not to cry if she was insulted in the royal game because she dared to call the host a rookie. So now has to answer for her words. Fu Jiali, when he saw all those comments, didn't want her to lose hope because of them and told her to turn off the broadcast and not worry about them. Well, Mo Li had already had a chance to read one of them and asked if he was seriously saying now that women can't play cyber sports. And then she asked, what does a man even know how to do as a man? Does dying for a few seconds and messing up the whole round just like he did? She then turned to the guy and asked if he had said anything, because she was so engrossed in playing and asserting herself that she didn't even hear. But Fujiali waved his head and said that there was nothing important there. At that moment, he thought that if a professional like him was killed, she certainly didn't have even the smallest chance. But then suddenly he thought that she might lose and cry because of that. He tried to think of what to do in such a case and how to comfort her. Mo Li had been very focused on the game the whole time. And at this moment, Fujiali suddenly heard the notifications that she had made the first kill, and then another one after that, and it all happened in succession. She was able to kill 5 of her enemies in one go, and the guy, when he saw that, he was incredibly surprised. He looked at her, at the way she was focused on the game, and didn't realize who this woman even was. But at this moment, a sign with the words "Victory" flashed on the screen, and everyone immediately started to get very excited. However, Fujiali was still very surprised, not understanding how she could even win. Then various comments immediately started appearing in the chat room. Many people said that they wanted to know everything about this woman, and it was even cool to be killed by a girl in the game, and so beautiful. A lot of people even wondered what happened to the guy, who said women were really bad at the game. He asked how he felt about this victory, and what he thought now. Fujiali turned to the girl, who was just taking off her headphones, and asked in surprise who she even was. Mo Li smiled and replied in a calm voice that she is Mr. Shea's hot lover, and he is so obsessed with her that he brought her to his house. Apparently, he doesn't want to flaunt his feelings to everyone, but keep them secret so that no one even thinks about her. Fujiali was very angry when he heard this answer. He thought that it was probably not true. He grabbed the girl's hand and asked if she was kidding, or seriously saying that. Fu Yanshen was in his office at this time for a press conference of Fu Corporation. They were dealing with some rather important matters of their firm. And while he was sitting there typing something on his computer, he felt a sharp pain in his wrist. It didn't feel like a cut, but it still hurt and was uncomfortable. Since he hadn't lifted anything heavy or done any physical exercise, the man guessed that it was probably because of Mo Li. It annoyed him to be so connected. He looked at his wrist and wondered what was wrong with it in general, why it kept getting into some kind of trouble. Fu Yanshen thought that she was only giving him trouble, and his arm continued to ache and his muscles tightened. He tried to rub it to make the pain go away. It was all to no avail, however, and his worker, who was sitting next to him, asked if he was all right. But Mr. Fu replied that everything was fine and he could ignore him. But at this point, the pain began to spread throughout his body, and the man couldn't take it anymore. He stood up quickly from the table and, turning to all his colleagues, said that the meeting was hereby suspended. Of course, he wasn't going to explain anything. At this moment in Fu Moli's house, because the guy pushed her hard, she hit her back right on the corner of the table. Fu Jiali was gaining on her more and more each time he asked her who she even was, and threateningly said that if she didn't stop saying various tall tales, he wouldn't hold back and would have to use physical force. Mo Li paid no attention to his words and asked in a calm, quiet voice what she had said that was wrong in the first place. Then she repeated that Mr. Shen himself had brought her to this house, and it was not her fault in any way. The girl explained that he loved her so much that he was constantly whispering in her ear and calling her his hot hottie. But at that moment, the door to the room opened and the guy and the girl heard someone's phone hit the floor and fell. They immediately turned sideways to see what was going on and saw him near the butler's door, who was so thoroughly surprised by her words that he didn't even hold the phone in his hands. He just stood there looking at the girl, not understanding how she could even say such things, for their master had never had such feelings for anyone. And Fu Jiali glanced over to the girl. The guy immediately realized that he could get in trouble for doing that to her, so he let go of her hand. Immediately, the notifications in the live chat started coming in. Many people asked what was going on in the host's room and why the stream stopped at all, because Fu Jiali specifically turned off the broadcast so that the viewers could not see it all. The butler quickly picked up the phone from the floor and held it out to the girl, saying that the lady had someone to talk to. The girl was very surprised, but she immediately picked up the phone and started talking on the phone. Fu Jiali, who was standing behind him, frowned at this and couldn't believe that his uncle could really bring this girl to their house. When Mo Li answered the phone, she immediately said hello to Master Sheng, and he in turn, with a different voice, asked that she take care of herself and not distract him. The girl, hearing this, was very surprised. But the man didn't explain anything, he just hung up the phone and left Mo Li confused. She moved the phone away from her ear and turned to the butler to ask what he even meant. The man who overheard her conversation asked if perhaps he meant to tell her to go to bed early, for he was concerned for her health. Then he led her out of the room and told her to follow him, because he would show her where the restroom was if she needed it. Fu Jiali, who also came out of the room to see what the butler wanted to show her, didn't understand what was going on. In fact, it was the first time the guy had ever seen his uncle pay so much attention to someone in his life, and even making a caring phone call. It wasn't like him at all. He was even more curious at this point. Who was this girl that was able to have such an effect on his uncle? Li Hanting sat in his office the next day, scrolling through the news feed on his phone as usual. And at this moment, he came across the news that a beautiful woman who called herself Miss Jun suddenly appeared in yesterday's live broadcast. And this girl not only has a nice voice, but also has a good level during the live broadcast. She even said that she was called a hot hottie. There was also a video and some excerpts from the fight attached, and when the guy read it all, he was downright furious, not understanding how this was even possible. He was so angry that he even threw the phone against the table, and it bounced off, flying off into the distance. He started to ask angrily if this woman was just messing with him, if she was doing this on purpose. He sat back down on the couch and with a puff of breath told her to wait some more, because he was going to show her who was really in charge. Li Hanting wasn't alone in the room. There was an assistant standing next to him, who was very surprised by the gentleman's behavior. When he was about to say something, the man asked them to keep an eye on Jiang Mo, as he wanted to know everything about her whereabouts. The next day, there were quite a few different workers in the Fu family's house bringing boxes into the rooms. Mo Li supervised their every move and directed where they should put them. Many of the workers were very surprised, as they had never seen so many parcels ordered in one day before, and assumed that this girl was incredibly rich. But when one of the workers said this, the other asked him to speak more quietly, for this is the Fu family's house, and they are the leaders in their town, and such purchases are just trifles to them, worthless pennies. Mo Li, while she was in charge of the staff, was really happy. She actually enjoyed making such expensive purchases. The system that just showed up and watched the whole thing said that apparently she really likes to spend her time like this. And she also added that if her father found out that the money he gave her was spent on useless online shopping, he would definitely die of overexcitement. But Mo Li was unwilling to listen to anything. In fact, she had already spent a whole $1,000,000 and said that it was just nothing, because he still only considered his daughter as a money earner and nothing more. And she said that if she hadn't fallen in love with the villain, and he certainly wouldn't have given her a single yuan. At this very moment, the master of the house came home. Fu Yanshen, as soon as he crossed the threshold of his manor, was very surprised to see 1,000 workers carrying more and more boxes into the house. Snimu, his nephew, came down to meet him, and watching the whole thing, turned to his uncle. Fu Jiali was as surprised as his uncle, and turned to him and said that he hadn't actually thought he would have such strange taste in women. Fu Yanshen did not reply to this. After all, he really had no choice, and his preference in women was not taken into account here. He went onward, going into every room to find the girl and have a serious talk with her about it. Soon, he walked into the restroom and saw Mo Li sitting in a large massage chair and relaxing. The girl herself, hearing that someone had come in, opened her eyes and, saying hello to Mr. Shen, said she was very glad to see him. Fu Yanshen didn't say anything to this. He only stared at her angrily, unable to understand how she could behave so calmly and casually. First there was an exchange of glances, and then an invasion of his personal space. He didn't understand what the mysterious girl's purpose was, or what she was trying to accomplish. Mo Li didn't really think about any of this. She was sitting in her massage chair, enjoying what she had, because she had set herself the goal of not worrying, because she didn't have much time left. They were silent for a while, and after that the girl, smiling, said that this massage chair was incredibly comfortable, and wondered if by any chance Mr. Shen would like to try what it would be like. But the man didn't answer anything to that. He only looked at her with a blank stare. Mo Li was actually thinking at this moment that he should reject her as soon as possible so that she could live peacefully. Fu Yanshen, after a while, smiled softly and said that he really wanted to try it out. She, of course, thought he would refuse, so she laughed and said she was sorry. But then she realized that he had, on the contrary, agreed, and she had to give up her seat after all. Mo Li was very surprised and stood beside him, watching the man sit down in the massage chair. She was very uncomfortable watching him try to turn on the massage chair and somehow enjoy the process. And so, after a while, the man finally managed to relax, and he said that it was indeed very comfortable, but it was too late. So he said he wouldn't keep her. Mo Li was very surprised and said that it was her massage chair after all, and she even ordered express delivery for it. He turned to his assistants, waving his hand, and told the girl that the Fu family could temporarily keep Madame's belongings, and it wouldn't be a hassle. Smiled at her goodbye and told her not to worry as her things would be fine. They were in a decent place. Mo Li was very surprised and thought, does he really think she cares about safety? In fact, she just wants to go back to her vicious lifestyle, playing on the computer until late, drinking sodas and watching various TV series without worrying about anything. Then she decided to take action. The girl took his tie in her hands and started to move closer to him. In a quiet voice, she said that it made no difference to her at all, whether they were whole or not. At that moment, she put her knee on the empty seat on the chair beside him. She was so close to him that the man could even smell the scent of her beautiful perfume. The girl smiled and said she was sorry that it was time to say goodbye. She kissed him on the cheek goodbye and called him her dear Mr. Shen. They stared directly into each other's eyes for a while, but after that the girl quickly got up from his lap and ran off, saying goodbye. Fu Yanshen touched the spot where she had kissed him when she was alone, and sat there completely surprised and not understanding what was even going on or why she had done it. While the girl was walking through the corridors heading to her room, the system approached her and told her that she was definitely finished, and he would definitely kill her. Mo Li, surprisingly, was completely calm. She said that it didn't matter to her at all, and asked the system to tell her how such an amazing man could be so cold. She just didn't understand it. Then the girl thought about the fact that perhaps he would behave differently in bed, more openly and even passionately. Mo Li blushed as she thought about it, but in fact, she couldn't wait to see it all and feel the pleasures that could be had. The system at this point thought alone that she would definitely get banned because of all the vulgarity. However, they moved on. Soon the girl returned to the Zhang family's house. It was already quite dark outside. Mo Li, as soon as she returned home, was immediately met by her father. He noticed that she had returned too late and asked if Mr. Fu had delayed her a lot. At that time, some other girl showed up behind her and asked her to tell her about Mr. Fu and how come he had personally come to pick her up. This girl was the daughter of Mo Li's stepmother. Her name was Jiang Han. She looked at her stepsister and said that it was time for her to make an election. Otherwise, she would end up with nothing. The girl was not going to answer her questions and advice. She asked if she was still in middle school, and also asked if she had done her homework and how she was doing. She pelted the poor girl with various questions about her future, what her plans were, how she was going to pass her exams, and in general, what she was planning. Jiang Han got angry and asked if rich people like them even need to do any housework. After all, she doesn't understand what it's for. Mo Li was surprised and asked what she was talking about. Does she want to fail all her exams and sit at home until she is old, knowing nothing and doing nothing? After that, she turned to her father and said that she had already told her that staying at home would do her no good. Then she asked her father if he could give her some money for pocket money, because she didn't need much, only 300,000 yuan. He had no time to answer, however, for some elderly woman came into the room, smiling, said that the food was ready, and called all present to the table. This woman was Jiang Mo Li's stepmother. Her name is Feng Wan. Her face was quite kind and caring. At this point, the system appeared next to the girl and said that he thought he should have given her the role of the main provocateur rather than a minor villain. Mo Lee called him baby again and asked what he was even talking about, since she was fine with the villain's survival scenario, and asked if he would just let her die like that. The kitten answered nothing to this, and the next day, early in the morning, the girl had visitors who surprised her very much. As soon as she woke up, she saw Gu Xiujie right in front of her door. He smiled happily at the girl and wished her a good morning. In fact, according to the original plot, on this day she has to show her love. The hero, his admirer, will push her into the water, after which she will get very sick, and this will lead to the love relationship between the protagonist and heroine. Well, of course the girl isn't even going to do that, because she doesn't want to kill herself. The system started to get indignant and told her not to even think about messing anything up. At least, not this time. If she didn't follow the plot, she would send a complaint to the main punishment system, and they would pick the cruelest one for her. Mo Lee made an innocent look at this and said that she was just a weak beauty, and asked if she could fail to complete such a simple task. Her father, who was standing next to her, looked at her angrily. After that, he shifted his gaze to their guest and said that Gu Xiujie had come to invite her to have lunch, so she should get ready as soon as possible. At this point, the system told her that if she suddenly turned him down, he would definitely find a new heroine and just dismiss her. So, to both of them, she cheerfully replied that it was fine and she was okay with it. Then she came closer to the guy who was sitting on the couch and asked if it was right that they were going to have lunch. Then she suggested that they go to a place she knew very well. Gu Xiujie at this time kissed her hand in greeting and said that he would agree to anything she said. She was actually quite disgusted by it, so she cleaned up quickly enough and wiped her hand. After that, Mo Lee went to the room to clean herself up. The system at that moment did not understand what had happened to the story, and the place she named was exactly where the protagonist worked. The girl smiled and said that in a bloody novel, the heroine gets in trouble and the hero gets in trouble. And instead of looking for Li Han Ting, she asked, why don't they just let him come to them? It would be much easier for everyone that way. She also said that she remembered that there was still a storyline with Gu Xiujie and asked the system how about taking him out of the storyline so he wouldn't get in the way. But the system said that it could end very badly. Soon they were already packed and arrived at the restaurant the girl had named. It is a luxurious restaurant frequented by the dignitaries of G-Town, and working in such a high-end restaurant is just right for the protagonist of this novel. When they sat down at the table, a young and attractive girl approached them. It was Su Ming Xu, the protagonist of the novel 7 Nights with a Wolf as a cute animal. But when Mo Lee saw her, she was very surprised. She didn't know that she was the protagonist of the novel. After all, she is just a little white rabbit who has not even seen the world yet, unlike herself. And the girl was very surprised that Mr. Sujie could like such unremarkable girls. She was sure that it was not like that at all. When the girl approached them, she looked very upset, and the guy, seeing her expression, gently called her by her nickname and asked her not to misunderstand him. After all, he had nothing to do with this woman. Mo Lee at this moment tried to hold back her smile at the fact that her plan had succeeded after all, and thought about the relationship ending for sure. Su Ming Xu looked at the guy at this moment and asked if it was true. He smiled and asked if she didn't trust him. He then said that she could ask Madame if he was not trusted. He looked angrily at the girl at this point, trying to give her a hint not to say too much. And Mo Lee at this moment just sat and watched all these dramas that she loved so much. Then she smiled, and fixing her hair said that everything was right and she just had it all wrong. Mo Lee also added that Mr. Gu wants to marry her and she just hasn't said yes yet. But when the girl saw his angry face, she wondered if he didn't want to tell her already, or if he was afraid she would get jealous of him. Su Ming Xu now stood up for herself as well, and said that the woman just misunderstood everything. After all, they are not dating at all. But Mo Lee only laughed and told Tanya not to be nervous, so it doesn't really matter if he likes her or not. He's not her type anyway, so he's not going to compete. The poor waitress was very surprised. She didn't know if rich people were always so straightforward. The girl smiled and asked if they wanted her to leave them alone. After all, perhaps they wanted to discuss something or just relax together. But Su Mingxiu immediately turned around and started to leave, saying that it was fine after all, she had to work, so she wouldn't disturb the two of them. Gu Xiuzye tried to stop her. However, the girl was not going to stay there for a second. At this moment, the man was very angry and thought that she was the mother's favorite perfect for the role of his wife. In addition, she is also the target of the Lycontine. Therefore, he shouldn't let her go. He sat back down at the table and turned to Mo Li, making a nonchalant face. Gu Xiuzi said that Mr. Fu has an unpredictable temper and is very easy to provoke. However, it is difficult to get rid of him and asked if she knows what happens to women who lust after him. Mo Li asked without much interest, "So what is it?" And he said in a serious voice that one of them was still in a mental hospital because she had gone crazy. The girl made a very surprised look and said it was creepy. And then I wondered if that's what the interest was all about. Gu Xiuzye, when he heard this, was very surprised and asked, "Is she really saying now that this might be interesting?" Mo Li smiled and asked if he thought the man would abuse her mentally and physically, or put her on a chain and torture her. The system, which was watching all this from the outside, was very surprised and asked what it was even doing, since it was only making things worse. Gu Xiuzye laughed nervously and said that she had quite a rich imagination and a good sense of humor. But at that moment, there was a loud bang. A plate shattered, and one of the customers got very angry with Su Mingxiu. He wanted her by the arm and called her an idiot, asking if she even knew how much his suit cost. The girl tried to break free of his heavy grip and said she was a waitress, not a bartender, and asked why he even dared to touch her. But the man only started smiling evilly and said that she was just a waitress, and if she apologized to him properly and made him happy, he would turn a blind eye to the incident. Su Mingxiu was horrified at such a suggestion and began to push out hard against him, asking for him to let her go. Gu Xiuzye, who saw this, couldn't help himself. He started to walk over to somehow intervene in this situation. However, suddenly something unexpected happened. At this moment, Li Hanting suddenly walked into the restaurant, and seeing this whole scene, asked what he was even doing. Mo Li, who was watching this with special interest, thought that this girl was really the protagonist. Wherever she went, something was happening, and someone was trying to save her. Suddenly she realized that the system had not commented on anything for a long time, and stroked his head and asked why he had suddenly stopped talking. Kotick became indignant and said that he was actually waiting for her, the shameless liar, to finally finish her task. But the girl told him not to panic, because you can just enjoy the whole show. It is so interesting, and she will watch the plot, and will definitely fulfill the task she was given. At this point, she got up and started to walk off somewhere. The system immediately called out in panic and asked what she was going to do in the first place. But she, of course, didn't listen to anyone. At this moment, Su Mingxiu was standing between the two guys who were so eager to save her, and she didn't understand the tension between them. They were looking at each other so much that they seemed ready to kill each other right now. They stood like that for a while longer. But then the girl turned her attention to the one who approached them. It was Mo Li. Li Hanting was very surprised to see her and asked her what she was doing in this place. The girl smiled and said that she had come for a date with Mr. Gu, and it was a great coincidence that she met young Master Li, for it saved her from another trip. The man who was watching her closely realized that she was the same vulgar and vain woman, and he doesn't know when it started. But somehow she seemed so nice that it was impossible to take his eyes off her. But he kept his anger to himself, and smiling asked, "Does she really have any grudges against him?" Mo Li replied that it was not at all. She doesn't have any hard feelings. She just wanted to tell Mr. Gu that she was carefully considering the engagement. Gu Xiuzye, hearing this, immediately picked up on her notes. He put his arm around the girl and looked at her and said that she was telling the absolute truth. Li Hanting immediately became very serious and asked if she had only come to see him because she wanted him to hear that she loved him. But the girl smiled and asked how he could even think of such a thing. And wasn't he aware that it was him she liked? She would do anything for him. And after these words, there was an awkward pause between them all. No one understood what was happening or how to react to it at all. At that moment, a notification came into the system that the task of finding the main character to tell her how she felt had been completed. Kitten was very surprised that she was able to do it after all, and the girl smugly asked how he liked the job and if she did it quickly, and if he was satisfied now that she was behaving obediently and following the plot. Well, then she quickly turned away from them all, thinking that the task was done, so there was nothing else for her to do. She turned to Mr. Gu and told him she was just leaving and reminded him to pay the bill. But at this moment, she was stopped by her hand by Li Han-ting, who quickly walked up to her and menacingly asked where she was going since the matter was still pending. Another man also approached her. He put his hand on her shoulder and smiled, and said that he was telling the real truth and that she would go home when they were clear.